to my final project presentation by Frank Palmisano. My application involves checking current exchange rates using a web API to return exchange rates based on a certain country that has been selected. Also, we use core data to store notes that are relevant to the current country selected in order to have a reference when we come back to the application. So, as we can see here on the right side, the iPhone displayed is currently displaying the exchange rates for Australia. So as we can see, $1 Australian is 1, which is pretty accurate. Also, with a Great British Pound, $1 Australian is equal to 0.58 Great British Pounds, and so on and so forth. Say we want to purchase a euro in the future, so we'll purchase 2 euros tomorrow. Let's add that as a note. I'll say purchase 2 euros tomorrow. Then I click the save button, it saves the notes into core data. So if I were to go back and then select Australia again, we'd return the same note, which is stored in core data. Now we're going to look at the MVC diagram. So we'll start at the view. On the left here, we can see the view, which displays cells in a list table that we've previously seen on my application. It displays all the buttons and features, displays the country rates, it displays the map, and displays the notes view for entering notes. Above this and to the right, we can see the controller. The controller contains the table view model. It also contains the notes NS object that will be stored in core data, contains responses to all buttons, contains responses to all web service API calls, and contains a retrieval of core data. Also controls the notes object in core data. So the relationship between the two, view and controller, is view has the ability to update variable values in the controller. Also, it updates values for actionable items such as buttons, segues, and maps. The controller in this case updates changes for labels, cells, and other UI items, provides a reaction, and changes of UI based on input that is stored in the controller. Now let's look at the model. The model is on the bottom right here. The model contains the core data of what is being stored, as we saw before when we were changing these values. Let's look at how model influences a controller. So model has the ability to send commands to manipulate data in the model to be controlled by the controller, which in turn can update the view based on those new models and inputs. The model also receives and initializes data using getter and setter methods in the controller. Now let's look at the relationship between controller and model. The controller updates and controls the variable values and behavior. So this is if we store an object, say we're storing a string value into notes and we want to save that for later use, it will store that in the model, and the model will control how that is stored. Also, the controller manipulates data to be controlled or to be initiated by the controller. Next, let's look at my class diagram for my project. The class diagram here is made up of 3 parts. So we have the view controller class, the country table view controller, and the NS object notes model, which is stored in core data. The view controller class is what we're seeing right here on the right on the iPhone itself. So it contains all the labels for the countries and the labels for the conversion rates. Also, we can see that it contains the text view for notes to be entered and then saved into core data. We can see here at the bottom that we have a map view. The map view uses the current country as input and then stores a longitude and latitude to be received by an API of maps that is at Apple and retrieves that information to be accurately displayed on the map below. This may look like an easy task, but it was interesting to figure out how to implement this based on a selection from a table view, which is shown back here. See, if we were to select Canada, it would bring up the Canada view and show Canada in the map. Also, as we see here, it would display all the conversion rates. So let's go back to Australia. As we can see, purchase €2 tomorrow is still saved, which is an accurate representation of how core data works and how it was correctly implemented. Also, in the map, you can see that the label Australia is clearly defined. So let's go back to the list. And now in the list, this is the country table view controller. So the country table view controller controls this list here. It has the UI table view. Also, it contains an array of the symbols for exchange rates as well as an array for the country name. These are standard to be, these functions here are standard in order to control the list and which it segues to. At the bottom function here, prepare, this is where we send data to the next controller, view controller, that loads all data that is relevant to the previous selection. On the bottom here, we have our NS object notes model. Our notes model contains the country as in a string and any notes that were entered in as a string as well. Whenever we store any notes, it will be stored in the note text object here as a string, and then brought up later whenever we need to go back. The country is saved as well to reference the note text that is being accessed. This is important and almost acts like a dictionary. Now I will show you exactly how the final project works, our exchange rate. So when we open up the app, it immediately brings us to the table of our countries in a list. So as before, as we've seen, if we wanted to see the exchange rates based on a specific country, all we would have to do is select that country on the list. So let's select United States and see how it compares. As you can see, it loaded all of the exchange rate values in comparison to the United States dollar from the web service API call first, and then it updated all the rest. So we'll try that again. So we'll go back, and now we'll try Switzerland. So we click on Switzerland, and as we can see, it waited on the map first, and it waited for all the values to be collected at first before it did change any of the items in the view. Let's go back to the United States. So when we click on the United States, it brings us back here to the same screen and the updated values. So in the map, we can see that the United States is selected and all relevant exchange rate data is implemented and displayed right here in this table. Also, if I wanted to enter any notes, all I would have to do is type in purchase €3 tomorrow and then click save notes. And then if I were to go back out of it and select maybe Canada, where we can see it brings up Canada on the map and all the other data, and we can do what we want here, but we'll go back to United States and see that the notes data is still stored. Once I clicked on the list item United States, it went and it searched through the core data and brought up the correct string value from the model. Here I'm about to show you the consistency of this core data, so let's quit out of the app entirely. So I close the app, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen the app and see if my notes are still stored. So we'll go back to United States, and there it is. Purchase €3 tomorrow is still saved, and also it has been retrieved from the core data upon arrival. Now let's talk a little bit more about the map. So we have this label here, Mexico, and this label, Mexico, is converted into a string and then sent along the segue to be used by this view controller. So Mexico is placed at the top here, and then it is sent through Apple's Map API to be shown on the map here below. We can examine this behavior by looking at the function markMap. So we have received the place mark value by getting the string that was returned in the segue. So we'll get the latitude and then we'll get the longitude. And what we'll do here is manipulate the map by setting the center to the location of the country that has been sent through the segue. The location also is entered here, and we find the longitude latitude to make a pin. So what we'll do is we'll let the location equal the coordinate and then also set the title of the country name. And the country name is stored through the segue. Now let's look at the API call to get the currency data. So once we select a country here, we see that it loaded to Australia. But how does it retrieve the exchange rate based off of the country that was selected in comparison to the other countries that were on the list? In order to get the exchange rates through this API, we have to load all of the data first in the view will appear function that is provided automatically. So API queue is called. The function API queue first goes to the website for the API, enters in the URL, including the country code, and calls the API. So as we can see here, using URL session.shared data task with the URL that's been entered, it will call the API and then initialize all of the data to match the rates that were returned based off of the original country that has been selected. Then what we'll do is we'll set the dictionary that has all the rates to the values that have been returned. And then all of the values will then be stored into the labels through the view did appear that is called after view will appear. Now let's look at how notes are saved in core data. So we can see here that in Australia, as shown before, we entered in purchase €2 tomorrow. Let's look at the code to see how the notes are retrieved. In the code here, this is where it is implemented to retrieve the core data. So we set the delegate and the context to that get delegate, and then we have our context and we retrieve the notes by its entity name. Also, what we do is we go to notes fetch that has been established here, and we take the country name that is in the view controller and then search for it within the notes that are fetched. And then once we find the correct notes value, we take that notes value and then save it, and then take the note text view and apply that note text that is saved in the core data to the view. When we save a note, we click on this button here, Save Notes. Let's look in the code and see how that works. So when we save the notes, we can see that we have our delegate. We do pretty much the same thing that we did as with loading the notes and retrieving them. And the thing that we do here is we save the context as well. Saving context saves the information that has been entered in the notes box here. And also, first, to save the notes, what we do is we first create our object and fetch the notes object from core data. Then if it's empty, we won't do anything because there will be nothing to load. But if it's not empty, we go in and we fetch the first note that has the correct value that is corresponding to the country that was selected, and then we'll update that value in the note text. Thank you for watching my presentation on my application. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.